you don't know this, Jake was the previous host of the podcast. And we're going to get really deep into a topic that is hot and fresh in the industry, the Google Web Summit from last week.
For those of you who are listening to this, you would be proud of the 20 people that were there.
Your history with your portfolio of sites, just from a high level.
My best site was featured by Google as a publisher success story, so it was super cool. And a great backlink, right?
Backlink from Google. I mean, you should have survived anything. You could have survived an atomic bomb with that backlink. Is this a question of them not wanting to fix this?
I had the same question. I mean, I tend to believe they're not exactly sure how to fix it.
If there was anything impactful that Danny brought to the table.
First thing he said was like, first of all, I'm sorry, you're not the kind of sites we're trying to penalize. You're the kind of sites we're trying to reward.
You guys moved into breakout sessions. What were those like?
You're like rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic unless you fix this. Do I have hope? Yes. Do I have faith?
Q&A with Pandu Nayak, the head scientist of search.
Honestly, that was the most disappointing session of the day.
What have you been doing since the HCU has decimated things?
It's a good question.
Something that you could say to people who are listening who've been affected just like you. What changed for you walking away from this summit?
I do believe that it's complicated. Like a lot of people say, just roll it back, just turn it off, right? But it's like you have the September update that rolls into the March update, and like I don't get how all that works, but I do believe like...
All right, welcome back to the Niche Pursuits podcast. My name is Jared Bauman. Today, we are joined by a longtime friend of the podcast, Jake Cain. Jake, welcome on board. Thanks for coming.
Hey, thanks, Jared. Thanks for having me, man. Excited to be here.
Many of you longtime listeners will know Jake. Jake was a Niche Pursuits team member for a couple of years. I know that's when I first got to know you, is when you were working with the brand, with Spencer, with Jason Wilson as well. Actually met up with you at one point out in your neck of the woods. You went off after a couple of years, start your own portfolio of websites, and here we are today. And we're going to get really deep into a topic that is hot and fresh in the industry, and it is the Google Web Summit from last week. You were there. You were one of about 20 that were there, and we're going to dive deep into everything that happened because that is super relevant for everybody here who's listening.
Let's do it. I took a lot of notes. I think I'm ready for it. So I know a lot of people were... I put up a thing in the media buying group last week. I was at a different Google event, which we can talk about a little bit, but just kind of ask me anything. And there was a lot of interest just because I know a lot of people have been having a rough year, myself included, so a lot of people that are not at these events are kind of wondering who's there, who's saying what, that kind of thing, right? So I just wanted, while it was fresh in my mind, share a little bit about that experience. So happy to share that, answer any questions I can for sure.
Well, I can't thank you for being here. We're going to get into some topics. I'm going to hit you with some various questions that I think the community has. So we'll try to dive deep. I mean, it really did come out of that Ask Me Anything you kind of just posted. I didn't know you were at this event last week, although I should have assumed you were there given that you've been at other events in the past. Just to catch everyone up, we'll do like 60-second kind of summary or overview of where we're at, and then we'll dive into it. So obviously, we have this helpful content update that hit in September of 2023. And then subsequently, the March core update of 2024. And where we're at now is that a lot of publishers, a lot of content creators, a lot of small publishers have ended up having a significant amount of their traffic taken away by Google. And the general response from Google, and specifically we'll be talking about Danny Sullivan and his role as a Google Search Liaison, has been a bit distant, has been a bit bifurcated, has been a bit difficult to ascertain. And a lot of website content creators and bloggers have not only felt their traffic disappear, but also felt like Google doesn't really care very much. And so we get to this, we get to some hope that was given to us in the August 2024 update. Some sites saw some recovery. Most sites did not see recovery. And those that did probably saw 15, 20%. We have some edge cases. Here we are in November of 2024. We've had a couple of events, but the most notable one, I'd say, you went to two of them in the last couple of weeks, but the most notable one is this Web Summit. So why don't you tell us a little bit about your history with your portfolio of sites, just from a high level, so people understand what type of content you're creating, what happened with your sites in the HCU, and then maybe the last year that brought you to the Web Summit from last week.
Yeah, so I've been doing it for a long time. So I started in 2008, my first website, which I still own. Probably one of the only ones with kind of my face on it is ballparksavvy.com, which is about traveling to Major League Baseball stadiums. And so over the course of like 10 years, I started some other sites, ended up selling a site, and that allowed me to start buying sites. And so I now run about a dozen websites that are probably about half of them in Mediavine, half are in Raptive. But they just kind of are across the board. They're on sort of random topics. So like my approach, when I worked with Spencer, I learned a lot about long tail keywords and those sorts of things. And so that was often my approach is, I would buy a site, no matter the niche, I would hire a writer that was really passionate or knowledgeable about the topic. And I would do the strategy and say, hey, here's the gaps, like here's what we're missing. And we would go tackle the content. And so Google would be, 85, 90% of our traffic using that approach. So that's, I quit. My last job was working for Spencer. That's probably been about 6 years ago.
And I don't think
so I've been, yeah.
I'm kidding. I had to get one dig in.
Yeah, no. So that was a great day. So I've been, full-time self-employed since then, running, kind of a portfolio of sites. So it's what I do all day, every day. And the helpful content update, like the last year's been really hard on my sites. It's been a rough year. Things were going extremely well, just kind of with ad revenue, affiliate revenue, all those things, right? And it's just like started getting worse in September, got really bad, I think, in March. And it was weird, having the perspective of having this many sites. Obviously, some are better than others, let's be honest, right? So I know who's creating the content. I know the level of effort, all these things. And it's like, if you would have asked me at the time, which sites are most likely to get hit by a potential update, the sites that I thought were rock solid, these sites are never going to get hit, got hit the hardest. The sites that I would have said, yeah, I'd say there's potential they're getting hit, we're totally fine. So it was the reverse of what I thought, having that many sites. So it's completely bewildering to me. And it still is, frankly, in a lot of ways. So it's, to say that up front, like I've definitely been, and I think everybody that was at this event basically was there because they've been hit. I mean, that was a very common theme, 75, 80%, 90%, in some cases, 100% of our Google traffic is gone. So everybody in that room has been hit really, really hard over the last year.
Hey there, thanks so much for listening to the Niche Pursuits podcast. Did you know that Jared and I are members of a private group called the Niche Pursuits Community? And today I want to share with you how you can join for just $1. The Niche Pursuits Community is a private members area for niche online publishers to mastermind and grow their businesses together. We hold weekly calls live with experts where you can ask questions. These experts share tips on Amazon Influencer, Google Discover, building email newsletters, getting traffic from Facebook, and other strategies to grow your online business. You'll also be assigned a mastermind group of 4 or 5 other people in a similar stage in business as you. Dive deep into your business issues and get your problems solved. If you use coupon code PODCAST at checkout, you'll get your first month for just $1. Go ahead and give it a try. Come join me, Jared, and lots of other digital entrepreneurs inside my private group at community.nichepursuits.com. And be sure to use coupon code PODCAST. I'll see you on the inside.
And to kind of even double down on it, you've been successful enough previously that you actually won an award from Google. You were one of the featured people. I believe they call it a publisher success story. And I know Spencer did a video about specifically the people who've been hit that were featured in public success stories. It's almost odd that Google has heralded you as a champion of good content and then subsequently completely swept the rug out from underneath you when it comes to these updates. It's almost like a double whammy, if you will, or salt in the wound.
I agree that Spencer's kind of a jerk. You know what I mean? It's like he'll kick you when you're down. You think things are going great, patting you on the back, and then your site gets hit and he makes a YouTube video about it. No, I think he left my big site out of that. But it was definitely one of the videos. Like somebody else did that. And I kind of just skimmed the notes and I saw my site and I was like, I'm not watching that. It was too painful. Kind of highlighted, hey, here's publisher success stories on one side. So that's exactly right. A couple of years ago, my best site was featured by Google as a publisher success story. So, do some photos and all those things. And they publish it out. They put it in like a little coffee table book.
I saw that.
Yeah. So it's really cool. Yeah, really, really cool. So I shared that on my personal, social media and stuff. Cause in our world, like a lot of people don't really understand what you do and that whole thing. So it kind of gave you something like real, like, look, Google says I'm doing a good job. So it was super cool. And a great backlink, right? A backlink.
I was going to say, I have to.
Yeah,
for sure. Google is controlling search. A backlink from Google. You should have survived anything. You could have survived an atomic bomb with that backlink.
Right. You would think. I was even dropped, I think, a couple other sites I own in my bio or something. And then I started this link,
Yep.
trying to take full advantage of that. But anyway, so that's what led me to get invited to some of these other events, which they call Google Publisher Meetups. And those are much more of, it's like a totally different side of the business. There's just so many, like all these parts of Google are like their own business. Like, so they're so disconnected. So like that is more about publisher advocacy. Like they'll talk about tools that are coming up, some networking, like it's just, kind of like content, privacy stuff as it relates to like maybe affecting small business. So, so yeah, anytime they invite me to that stuff, I'm like, yeah, I'm in. So I've been fortunate enough to go to a few of those, but those are not connected to SEO. And so, but that's kind of how I got on the radar, I think, for this event was they knew that some of the publisher success stories had been hit and they were starting to hear that. And so they reached out to us and were like, hey, we're hearing this, like, let us know. And they gave us that feedback form. And they were like, I promise you somebody's going to read it. And that Danny Sullivan was sending out or whatever. And so I filled it out with some like really specific examples of what I was seeing. And then that's what I was told. And I think others at this event last week in California was that basically Danny, he said there was like 13,000 submissions of that form. He said he read every one of them. He said one person submitted it 1,700 times. So yeah, it just kind of went nuts. But anyway, he said he read every single one of them. And then they kind of picked 20, I guess, of the most kind of compelling cases or whatever that they thought would be good to kind of bring out and maybe cut out the middleman and like get you 20 people in a room with 20 or so search engineers and like, let's figure this out. So that was sort of the gist of how it came about.
Now, before we get into some of the details, because we've got quite the agenda here. This is one of the longest agendas we've created here for a podcast. A lot of things to talk about, but let's maybe just a really quick aside. You got a tour of the Google campus, right? Like,
yeah.
I mean, before we get into all the meat and potatoes of the HCU and what was said about that, like, I just have to ask really quickly, was that cool? Like, what were the highlights?
It was cool, man. So do you remember the movie? Did you watch The Internship?
Yep. Oh yeah.
With Owen Wilson
map on the internship and stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. So ever since I saw that movie, I mean, I just like, dude, what a cool place, right? So it wasn't as cool as it looks in the movie. Like there was no driverless car that came by or anything like that. So I think my expectations were Hollywood level, and it's super nice. Like, don't get me wrong, like sand volleyball court, like all of this stuff. So we got there the first day and yeah, Danny took us all on a tour. And then it was like the next day was going to be all of the content. And so we started there, beautiful campus. One thing that was weird, I've seen a couple of people point this out that were there was like nobody around. It was 4:00 on a Monday. And he even took us into, I guess, what was like the main building where they have all their Google Talks and stuff. And I mean, there was hardly anybody. It was like a ghost town. Like it was kind of weird. And he was like, is there something? Is it a holiday? Like, what is going on? Like I was expecting more of kind of a buzz, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It was just kind of dead. But as far as facilities and stuff, I mean, people at Google have it made. I mean, everything's free, like baristas, kitchens, stocked fridges and all that stuff. Like it was all of that stuff, right? So I joked, in fact, with one of the search engineers the next day. It was his first job out of college. And I was like, dude, never go work somewhere normal.
That's not normal.
Yeah. I mean, I've been lucky enough to see a couple of their buildings with those other events I mentioned. And yeah, everything's top notch. So it was cool, man. It's definitely been on my list. Like when people that work in our industry, right? Like to go to the Googleplex is like, wow, it's kind of like a nerdy bucket list sort of thing, but for sure it was cool. Not quite Hollywood cool, but it was pretty neat to be there.
All right, so let's get into kind of the makeup. You said about 20 people, just to give people some perspective. You kind of told us a little bit about what you publish, what kind of content you do, but like what kind of people were there? What kind of creators were there? And again, I just want everyone listening to kind of understand the scope of what was there. And maybe as they listen to the following questions and answers, like people thinking like, was somebody kind of like my site owner there? Like, I run this kind of site. It's this big. It's this type of, it's content. It's e-com. It's like, just to give people a perspective of what kind of people were at the table, who was sitting around the room, and what kind of site owners were there.
Yeah, for sure. And I'll try not to mention anybody by name through the course of this. I mean, whatever. They had some ground rules about privacy or whatever. So we're allowed to, share what was said. They said anything from the podium, but as far as just trying to protect people's privacy from both the Google side and the folks that were there. But yeah, I mean, it was mostly, full-time people that are, full-time in this business. There were several travel sites there. Some people that were a few that were in like the gaming space. And then a bunch of people that do different kinds of reviews. So like gear reviews for certain types of specialty, type items, things like that. Like, I think like clothing, things like that. Right. So there were some very much like review focused sites as well. And then a few that were just kind of like, I was thrown into like the general category when we did our little breakouts. So there were a few just kind of randoms, but definitely, several sites in all those categories that I just mentioned. And there were some people who were not full-time. So like, their site is part of what they do, but they also do this kind of thing. But I think most people in the room, that's kind of their thing, right? Like it's their business, it's their livelihood for sure. So like losing 80, 90% of it, you're on the brink. So I felt like that was most of the people in the room.
Okay. Were these people prior to the HCU like getting millions of page views a month, or were there some smaller publishers and like the hundreds of thousands of page views per month? Are these like big brands we'd know? So if you like mentioned their websites, we'd be like, oh yeah, that's a big brand. Or were there some smaller publishers that were like mom and pop, maybe a bit more like some of maybe you and I?
Yeah, I would say more like you and I, like more along the lines of mom and pop. Definitely not big brand, right? Like it's not like a household name at all. Maybe if you're into that, gaming or whatever, I'm not, but I might say it. You'd be like, oh yeah, I've heard of that, right? So
right.
I got the sense that they were, a lot of sites that were successful. I mean, I'm totally guessing, but sites making 6 figures annually, I would guess, that kind of thing. But definitely, it's not like you're in the room with Forbes and these sorts of guys, right? Like it's the goal of it was to be small independent publishers. So it was a lot of one-man show or a very small team. Like that was kind of the gist of what I got was in the room.
Yeah. Okay. So it sounds like from what we've talked about and from some other articles that I've seen come out, like Danny Sullivan's launched or kicked off the event, spoke for a while. I've heard about this talk he gave. And again, if at any point you feel like there's something valuable or relevant that is off course, just go off course. This is very open-ended in terms of how we're talking about it. But certainly we want to kind of hear if there was anything impactful that Danny brought to the table, whether it was in that conversation or another one. But I know he spoke for a good bit of time at the front end of this event. Maybe you could bring us up to speed on some of the things you thought were poignant that he said.
Yeah, for sure, man. Something I said to you before we started recording, I've seen Danny Sullivan 3 times now, including twice in the last 2 weeks. So I was at one of the publisher meetups in Chicago. I did this thing. But then a year ago, right after HCU had first rolled out, I was at a Google publisher meetup in Texas with Danny. And one thing I'll say is that his tone from then till now has completely changed. At the time, when HCU was a month old, Danny was, these are my words, a lot more just dismissive, like, hey, we're just surfacing helpful content, you can probably recover in a short amount of time. Like, you know what I mean? Like this isn't that big of a deal. Whereas this year, Danny, he started out by apologizing. Both events I went to, his first thing he said was like, first of all, I'm sorry. Like, I'm sorry you're here under these circumstances. Basically just said to those in this room in California, he said, we know you're subject matter experts. Harming you guys was not our intent. We want to make search better. And so something he said and then we heard many times throughout the event is that they want to highlight authentic human voices. They kept saying, those words. And so essentially what they were saying was like, you're here because we know that's you. Like you're not the kind of sites we're trying to penalize. You're the kind of sites we're trying to reward. And so that's how he started out, was basically just saying like, it's not your content. Like we're not saying you guys are creating helpful content. We recognize that. We want to figure out how to getting back to like fixing that. So that was sort of how he started and set the tone. And then he was very insistent and even said like, he took it kind of personally, like that this is not a PR event, which is something that, comes out. And obviously anytime you get into the comment section of anything, right? Like that's what a knee-jerk reaction, and to each their own, like, I don't know. But his point for that was like, look, if this was a PR event, we'd be taking group photos. Like we're not taking any group photos. We'd be live streaming this. We'd be promoting it, like telling everybody, hey, we're having this event. And so they didn't say like to us, you can't talk about it, but they just said, look, we're not going to be like announcing it. Right. Mm-hmm. So like, if you guys want to tell friends about it, whatever, fine. So we didn't have to sign an NDA or anything, but look, we're doing this. Like we want to get you in touch with search engineers. We want to get better. This is not a PR event. So that's how he kind of started out the day. It was just like set the tone for it. And so that kind of kicked it off. And then he spent, he probably spent about an hour talking about, just how search works and how it's changed and all those sorts of things. So nothing super revolutionary there, but just kind of setting the stage for what we're getting into.
Maybe we can get into some of those things because I know Danny made some comments about recovery. He made some comments about future updates, how it works. A lot of people who are hit by the HCU are curious because Google has gone on to say we won't have any more helpful content updates. It's now rolled right into the algorithm. It's baked into the algorithm. And so people are even wondering, like, well, what does it look like to recover from the HCU? Like, how is it possible if it's now just recovering from the general algorithm? I could throw a couple other tidbits at you just so you can kind of tackle them how you see fit, right? We've got this idea. And by the way, I've been a big, I don't want to say proponent, but I've certainly have not seen any reason to dispel this myth, which is that there's this site classifier that has gotten placed on top of sites that have gotten hit by the HCU. So again, if this is the right time, based on some of Danny's comments at that front end, like recovery, algorithm updates, core updates, baked into the core update, site classifier, is this a good time for us to get into some of those things?
For sure. I mean, so I can just kind of take you through like the kind of what happened next. I mean, I know at one point somebody spoke after him, and I forget her name, but she was a little bit, I guess, higher up in the search group or whatever. And she kind of lay like in her, I mean, she was being sympathetic, whatever, but then like in her thing, she said, the refrain that we all hate to hear, just keep creating helpful content.
Oh boy.
And there were some people in the room, I'm telling you, I'll say this. So let me say this too, before we get into the next section, right? Yeah. There were 20 people in the room, 20 of us left with 20 different opinions. You know what I'm saying? So like, I just want to say, I'm of course not speaking on behalf of anybody else. I've seen some of the articles out there on Twitter, like pretty harsh. And I'm not saying like any of them are wrong, right? So again, we all just kind of have our perspective. I'm just sharing mine. So, but there were some people that came like ready to go, and you could tell that before it even started. Right. And so I'll say that for those of you who are listening to this, and some of you were in my Mediavine chat last week who were like, man, I wish somebody would tell somebody at Google this. People said it. Like, you would be proud of the 20 people that were there and the things that were said. I mean, everything I could possibly think of was covered and like with authority. So know that, like, if you're thinking like, I wish I would say this, people just said it like straight to Google for sure. So definitely to the publisher community, I guess you'd be proud of that or whatever, however that makes you feel. It was real. So anyway, the lady had said that and somebody raised their hand right away. It was like, honestly, you saying that feels like a slap in the face to come here and tell us to keep creating helpful content. And it was kind of awkward. We're like 40 minutes into this 8-hour thing, but and there was no like, it was still back to like, oh, we're sorry, that kind of thing. Right. But it was like, nobody was letting them slide with kind of the company lines throughout the days. There were definitely people there ready to call them on some of that stuff that we've been listening to. And it was good. So, I mean, the next session after that, after Google kind of said their piece, like apologized, here's what we're trying to do, here's how search works, here's why it's really complicated, which I believe, like I understand it is very complicated, right? So they kind of laid that groundwork. And then it was like, hey, we want to hear from you. And so what they had told us ahead of time was there's 20 people. Each of you are going to get 3 minutes. And that's not the only 3 minutes you're going to have all day, but we're going to start with a listening session. And so there were about 20 Googlers in the room, all of which were connected to the search team at some degree. And then they had it like on a live Google Meet or whatever. And there were close to 30 people signed in on that, that were watching live. So maybe up to, like 50 Googlers that were listening. But yeah, and then we just kind of went around the room, passed a mic around. And basically I can give you kind of what I said. I won't take the full 3 minutes, but just to summarize, I was just basically like, look, some people think I'm drinking the Kool-Aid because I actually believe you. Like, I believe what Danny said in the sense that I still want to believe that Google really does want to give the best results to searchers. Like, you want to deliver the best experience. Like, I believe that. And I said, I spent time, I probably name drop Spencer. I always joke with Spencer. I'm like, anytime I go to anything, I always name drop Spencer Hall. People are like, oh yeah, I've heard him. So I was like, I spent time on some podcasts and things. Like, I would tell other people that, like I'd be kind of in a position to try to help other people. And like, look, just create great content. And like Google, this is what they do. Like, they're going to figure it out, right? Like, the best content's going to win in time. And I was like, up until a year ago, like, I felt like you guys actually were doing a pretty good job of that. And I've been doing it since 2008. but I said around a year ago, I said, it feels like something's broken is the only way I know how to describe it. And I said, I'm going to give you a couple of examples. And I shared very specific examples from two of my sites that are, again, I would say they're my best sites, content writers that know their stuff, yada, yada, who clearly have a site-wide classifier. And so every time I got a chance to talk, I talked about the site-wide classifier. Yeah, I mean, I did. Because I think it's in the helpful content documentation. I don't know if it uses that exact wording, but it can say it's like from 2022. It says it could be a site-wide something, right?
It is.
So it's there.
I think they call it suppression, but yeah.
Yeah. So it's the thing, right?
Yeah.
And so, but then I share the examples of like, I mean, it's insane. It's stuff where like, we've written a review of a product that's not competitive at all. Firsthand photos, the whole deal. Like, I mean, there's 2 or 3 people on the internet that have reviewed this product, right? Like, we're page 1 for years with that. You know what I mean? And now you can search that exact product review and add our brand name to it, and we're on page 3. And it's like, you'll come to Reddit threads about other products. I mean, some stuff that's like not even, it's clearly not firsthand, whatever, just terrible results. And so I was just like, that's the stuff to me that just says something's broken. Like, we can all look in this room and say like, that's not how it's supposed to work,
Right.
And so I believe there's smart people that work at Google. And so I think that you guys are going to figure out like, okay, something happened. We went too far, whatever. We're going to fix that. So I think it'd be better. And like, thanks for having us here. I kind of took that approach of like, look, we appreciate it. Like, y'all taking a day to talk to us, like, happy to share whatever we can, because I think you guys are going to fix this. And that was kind of my tone. But yeah, I mean, some of the other people, I took a few notes, actually. I can give you a couple of quotes or near quotes that I thought were really good, because again, people were bringing the thunder in there, man. Like, it was crazy. There was one guy who owns a travel site that I had heard of. And he was super passionate, super well-researched, but they're like, what you would want out of a travel site. Like, literally, they don't write about anywhere they've not been. They've got like a team of employees, I guess, basically, or freelancers that like specialize in this area, and they do everything firsthand. And they basically have had like a 95% drop in traffic over the last year from Google. And he mentioned that he feels more like it's the type of site than the quality of site, which is something else I've heard, like Google kind of targeting, made for ads kind of sites or whatever. And basically just said, look, if you search things to do in whatever, the results right now are horrible. They're horrible. Like, it's not even just about us, but like TripAdvisor's landing pages are AI generated for all that stuff. And they're on page 1 for everything. And then, somebody brought up an example in that same vein. It's like, it was like a luggage storage company or something, and they're page 1 for top 10 things to do in whatever, in Michigan or something. And it's like, really? Like, you know what I mean? The luggage storage company is now your expert, right? And we've written all this firsthand stuff and we're buried. And so, yeah, a lot of people just shared a lot of specific examples. He even suggested, which I thought was cool, because he was just talking about the level of effort that goes into their content. And you feel for these people, man. And he's like, and you've got all this just boilerplate nonsense stuff in front of you. Some of it's AI generated. He's like, I think you need to add another E to EEAT and make it for effort. It's like the level of effort that goes into the content says a lot about the quality of the content. You know what I mean? And he's like, it's so clear to see like this other stuff is just this thin crap, And so anyway, I thought that was really good. Another person was like, hey, look, talked again about just being called not helpful and like what a slap that was. And basically he's like, all of a sudden we're not helpful. And they talked about the great pains that they go to review their product. They're like, but now Billboard and BuzzFeed, like they're the experts in this like pretty niche focused, like specialty product. It's like, give me a break. Like, it's not even what they do. Right. So yeah, I mean, I could go like there were a couple others, like, there was one person and this, I mean, it was sad. Like, there was a girl there that's, I think she was a travel blogger. And she was one that says she gets 0 traffic from Google now. And so, I mean, she's on the brink, and she was like, I have such like mixed emotions being here. She's like, cause if this was a year ago, she's like, I would have been going around the Google campus. Like, this would have been like a dream come true. I'd been like taking selfies. She's like,
of her career.
Yeah. And she was like, and her words were, she's like, I feel like I'm at a funeral. She's like, I don't know any other way to describe it. You know what I mean? And it was kind of true. Like, it felt, there was like a heaviness like in the room as people were sharing their stories. Cause it was yeah, it was no bueno, man. One other person, this is the last one that I kind of wrote down. It was somebody else that was like, they shared their, similar struggles. Everybody had a similar story. All of a sudden we went from all this stuff was great to now nothing on your site is helpful, which all leads back to the site-wide classifier. And she was like, I'm getting off easy. Like I didn't lose my car. We haven't had to sell our house. And I know people that have, they've had to do that. And we haven't had to go to that level yet, So, yeah, there was definitely like, you could feel for a lot of people that took on the challenge or whatever of sort of speaking on behalf of the small publisher community that we would consider ourselves a part of. I think people did a really good job of that. And we're kind of like, hey, look, this isn't just 20 people. This is like tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of people that we're speaking on behalf of, So it was pretty powerful stuff.
You guys moved into breakout sessions. What were those like, and what was different about those in terms of maybe what was covered or your access levels to Google and the things that were covered in those?
Yeah, so we broke into, I think it was 4 groups. So they had like a travel group, product reviews group, something else, and then we were like in the general group. But it was like a whiteboard session. We had like 4 or 5 people with us, 2 or 3 Googlers. And I mean, you're talking to the search engineers. I mean, so I was impressed with those people from Google because they were asking good questions. They're taking feverish notes, guys with laptops out, like writing down everything you're saying, right? So it definitely didn't feel like you're just talking and they're like, oh, okay. You know what I mean? Like it felt like
well, that give me one of my questions, which on one side of things, it doesn't matter. This is a question I'm about to ask you, but the other side of things, I think everyone listening, me included, feels like it does matter. Like, those engineers were you talking, like, did they seem to have some empathy for what they were dealing with, the gravity of what their algorithm that they touch every day does to people, publishers, and businesses? Because their coding has the ability to completely change the face of people's lives as you're going through. I wonder if they had that gravity of the situation. It sounds like to some degree they at least had some finger on the pulse.
Felt like the people that were, the boots on the ground kind of people, and you don't know who's exactly does what. I felt like they very much did. And in fact, somebody asked Danny with the whole, the 3-minute thing the day before, like, hey, should we tell our story like this is how we've been affected, like financial sob story kind of thing, or should we tell like examples? And he was like, you're in a room full of engineers. He's like, these people are not public facing employees. Like, he's like, they're nervous in a lot of cases because they're not used to like having one-on-ones face to face, right? And so he was like, I would share examples. He's like, because that's what, they're engineers, right? And so that's exactly what I kept doing in these. And so they would write down these examples. So when I got a chance to talk on the small group, I said, I'll go first. I said, let's talk about the site-wide classifier. And I told my people at this event, I apologize if you're listening to this and I talked to you one-on-one, because at some point I told you my examples. I was like, yeah, I know what you're saying. Listen to this. So started there, because to me, Jared, this whole event is like everything that pretty much everybody said, like, kind of came back to that as like the root cause to me. So to me, and this is what I said, it's like, if you don't fix that, nothing else matters. So like some of the other stuff that came out, like, it sounds nice. Like, yeah, that could be good. Like some Google Search Console ideas, right? Things like that. I'm like, you're like rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic unless you fix this, And so I just wanted to make that really clear. We had one shot. So every time I got a chance to raise my hand, I was like, let's talk about the site-wide classifier, because that was the big thing to me. So that came up in our group. I'm sure it came up in other groups as well. It's just some other ideas that came out of that. They were basically just asking like, hey, give us ideas. Like, if you were us, like, how would you make it better? And so some people talked about like a verified publisher badge, right? Like having a process, like the idea almost sounded like kind of like a real business or brick and mortar can do like a Google My Business kind of thing, almost like a similar type verification, like, hey, we're legit sort of thing for publishers. Other people talked about how like YouTube has tools for creators to like let you know, like give you more feedback basically. So definitely ideas came up around, hey, if we're not helpful or whatever, like having more stuff available in like a Google Search Console to let us know, so we can like, we're just totally blind in this, right? So all of a sudden you're not helpful and you have no idea why. And then I mentioned in the group, like the Facebook bonus program. It was just kind of throwing it out there, like not with a specific recommendation, but I said one thing that, because AI came up a lot, right? And the AI overviews. And so I was like, right now, like for Facebook, if you're not familiar, essentially you can get paid for keeping people on the platform, which is their goal. And I was like, with Google, it seems like that's where you guys are moving with this AI stuff. I was like, but the concern in the room is you're basically just stealing our content. So like when you steal our content and you show that on the results, the only person making money is Google. At least these guys are kind of aligning our incentives. Facebook wants to keep you on the program. We're going to pay people who help keep you on Facebook. I was like, maybe there's something there. Like if you use my stuff in an AI overview, I can opt in to a revenue sharing that gives me a reporting that says you've been using AI overviews this many times and you made X, And so anyway, it was just kind of a brainstorm of stuff like that. Just some tools and things. So that's kind of what the small group thing was about. And then they sort of brought everybody back together and kind of shared what came out of that.
Hey everyone, Spencer here, founder of Niche Pursuits. Did you know that you can find and fix your orphan pages in the WordPress dashboard with Link Whisper? An orphan page is an article you've published with no internal links pointing to it from other articles on your site. Why should you fix your orphan pages? Well, it makes your site easier to crawl for Google, which can lead to more search traffic and improve your UX for your visitors. With Link Whisper, there is no need for expensive crawlers and tedious spreadsheets. Link Whisper simplifies the entire process. The orphan page dashboard in Link Whisper shows which pages need attention. It even recommends the perfect anchor text for your internal links. Ready to revolutionize your site's internal linking? Try Link Whisper today. Use the code PODCAST and get $15 off your purchase.
I want to take a little bit of a break here and ask you about some things that have been talked about as it comes out of the HCU. And if you could, just let me know if there was anything that was addressed by Google as it relates to this. And feel free to say like, yeah, that came up a bunch and they had no answer. That's fair, legit answer. But I'm just going to throw some different, I've been taking notes. By the way, this is off our agenda. So if you're wondering,
yeah,
a little aside. But I've been taking some notes as you've been talking about things as the host of the podcast through this whole HCU and having to kind of navigate that with our listeners and field their questions and try to make sure we come up with a podcast every week that adds value to their lives, even though at times it's felt like a funeral, to be honest. And these are the things that I keep hearing us talk about and consistently. It's this idea, and a lot of this you've already mentioned in passing, so I'll just touch on it. Specifically, did Google respond to any of this as it relates to having websites that do monetize mainly with ads and or affiliate websites? We've seen case studies come out from Cyrus Shepard, ads and the correlation between the HCU being I think 4 out of the 5 highest correlated indicators coming out of HCU sites being hit was ad related. Affiliate links, same kind of thing. They decimated the product review space. Did they address anything as it relates specifically to ads or affiliate links?
Something I remember is not in like a session or anything, maybe just as an aside, like occasionally they'll share an example of like, oh, you go to this site and this ad pops up here and like you can't get to the content. So maybe in the context of like user experience. Okay. But I think the examples they usually give are kind of extreme, you know what I mean? Like for overused ads. Outside of that, not really. They didn't specifically talk about that.
Okay. The idea that they're rewarding through the HCU and subsequent updates, they're rewarding real businesses. So like plumbers writing generic 300-word articles about how to change a fitting are getting rewarded because they're actually plumbers versus people who write awesome informational content, research the heck out of it. This idea that you need to have a business, and people have gone on to start businesses, travel websites. I know for a fact because I've consulted with them, have gone on to start travel agencies simply to show they're a real business to get around this HCU classifier. Anything on that from Google?
So I know for sure people brought this up because it was in multiple examples. I think I shared one earlier, right? Of people that are doing that. So for sure it was brought up from the publishers. I don't remember them specifically like addressing it, you know what I mean? Like saying, other than they would acknowledge it many times, it's not perfect. We need to get better. We know you guys should be ranking. You're not, that kind of thing, right? So, but yeah, I don't remember them saying anything specific about that.
Okay. The idea of direct traffic or social traffic as a necessity for surviving the HCU. In other words, if you relied on Google for all of your traffic, which so many of us in this community, right, have driven our sites through SEO, through organic traffic, and without social traffic, or specifically more highlighted direct traffic, right? The idea of a brand, that brands drive direct traffic and that direct traffic kept you safe through the HCU. Was that addressed at all?
The only context I remember on that is, there were some in the room that had like incredible social followings and presence. And they kind of use that as an example. Like somebody had like 2 million followers on Pinterest or something. And they're like, look, we see that you've got 2 million followers on Pinterest, like that kind of tells us that people think you're helpful sort of thing, like just to reemphasize the point. But, not really like as far as like direct traffic, that sort of thing. And just to be honest, I mean, to those questions, and they said this out of the gate. And as you can imagine, they were basically just like, look, we're not going to be able to give anybody specific advice. And frankly, the times I've been with Danny Sullivan, even this event, as far as the stuff coming out from Google towards you, is very unsatisfying, to use a Google word, because it's like, we can't really say anything. Like, even when it comes down to, is this how it works? Like those kind of questions. So like all the things you said definitely came up in what we said, but the responses are really non-responses. And I think it's like, you get it, right? Because they're like, look, we really can't say like it. And so they kind of said that up front, like, is this a factor? Like that kind of stuff, where they're just like, we can't really say, you know what I mean? And then they would give something that felt very generic. So it's kind of frustrating.
Maybe let's address that elephant in the room. They can't say, or they don't know. Like, are they even aware of what the algorithm exists and looks like now? Are they aware of how to fix it? Is this a question of them not wanting to fix this? Or is this a question of them, this is a runaway freight train, it's been going down the mountain for a while and everyone's just jumping out of the way?
It's a great question. I had the same question. I mean, I tend to believe, and I think, I don't know, maybe I'm sure some people have a more informed opinion than I do. I kind of think that they're not exactly sure how to fix it. I don't think they didn't say that. Like, hey, we don't know how to turn this off.
A while now, like, they know how to fix it. I don't think anybody in there knows how to fix it for a variety of reasons. I don't know that. I wasn't at the event, but
yeah, like, so I've gone to other publisher events. We have friends, people we know who have been pretty much completely unaffected. Like, you know what I mean? That are small independent publishers like us they're doing fine. You know what I mean? So that's good. So like, I don't personally buy the narrative of like Google hates small independent publishers and they wiped all of them out. Like, I do think there's something to, and again, speaking from a guy who's gotten crushed this year, I think that a lot of the people that you hear from on social media and stuff are like, they're devastated, right? You're having to make hard decisions and all these things. And so that's kind of an awkward time that if you're in the Mediavine group, you're not going to be posting screenshots like, I crushed it again, like new personal best. It's like a weird time there because you don't want to be like dunking on your fellow publishers.
Yeah.
And then I see it too. Like when I search anecdotal results, when I want to get depressed, I go and I look and I see these sites that are, smaller than mine that seem to be doing just fine. I'm like, okay, some people are still winning here, despite the fact that Reddit's up there and all these things. Like, there are still some people doing well. So I think that speaks to at least what they say. It gives some credibility of like, our goal wasn't to wipe out all small publishers. And my hope is from this event and what they said and what I think they were trying to do. And the reason I have hope is because we were talking directly to like search engineer people that actually do the work. It was kind of nice to give specific examples. My hope is that they were going to use kind of our sites. It was Google saying, okay, here's 20 people that we know are like legit. Like, these are the good guys. They didn't say those words. These are the good guys. Like, they're going to come give us like really specific stuff. And hopefully we can use that to create some, whatever you want to call it, but kind of update this thing with some more signals to say, okay, what are we missing here? Because we know, and they've basically said this, way too many good sites got wrapped up in this update, right? They got treated as unhelpful content. Danny Sullivan even said he wishes they could go back and rename it because he's like, Google doesn't define how helpful you are, all of these things, right? And so they've said that. So that's kind of what I took from it. And some of that's just my opinion, is that they want to just like, they're a little bit lost on it. Like, we don't know why a lot of the good guys got caught up in this thing. I believe they do actually want to fix that. And I think that hopefully this was a way for them to like, all right, now let's go figure out however the heck we bake that into the algorithm. Whether they can do it or not, totally different question. I really don't know.
Yeah.
So I saw somebody that was there posted on Twitter, and I felt like they summed it up well. Now I just set that up, and now I forget exactly what they said, but they were like, do I have hope? Yes. Do I have faith? Not really. You know what I mean?
I wasn't giving a shot of faith at this one, is what you're saying. Like, they didn't do anything to build my faith up, but my hope maybe.
Yeah, I'm still hopeful for better or worse. Like, it's not, you know what I mean? Like, I've moved on. I know we're going to kind of get into this, but like, for me personally, like, I've moved on to just like, I haven't been creating content for Google. There's a number of sites I'm not really creating content at all. I'm just kind of in a holding pattern, but everything I'm doing is about, Pinterest. I've done some Facebook stuff. So for me, it's been a year of like getting really lean with costs. and then also adding traffic sources and additional revenue sources. So Amazon influencer stuff, stuff that's just unconnected from that. Like that's where I'm at right now, is just trying to you go into a little bit of survival mode. And then my hope is, I think they want to do kind of the right thing, that they figure this out to some degree. Probably not ever coming back to where it was, figure it out to some degree. And then in the meantime, rather than just sitting there being mad or sitting there doing what I've always been doing and publishing one article every week with SEO optimized, wasting my money on that, hopefully I come out, I'm in a stronger position, right? Because I've done all these things. I've kind of had to get creative. And then now Google comes back a little bit too. And so that's what I tell myself, Jared. So that's what I'm hoping happens. Yeah.
I mean, and you're exactly right. I feel like we're probably going to go over on this one. I'm normally pretty good about keeping these suckers out on, but no, it's not your fault. This is good because I do want to get into the second half of our agenda, but I want to touch on one more thing as it relates to this topic, Ron. You've touched on a couple times. So let's just, if this is a double whammy for people because the HCU is decimating, but going into the HCU, going into 2023, the first 8 months of 2023, actually all we were talking about as content creators was AI. And what was Google going to do with the SGE and how they were going to steal our results and steal our organic traffic. And we were blindsided by the HCU because we thought AI was what was coming to eat our lunch.
Yeah.
To some degree it has. We have AI overviews now. And to your point, it is taking up a lot of our answers, straight theft from our site. That's my down and dirty on it. But was there any mention, you already said there was, but hey, I'll just ask the high level question, what was mentioned about AI overviews? I mean, this sounds like it was very much focused on the helpful content update, but you can't have a conversation about content these days and not address what AI overviews is doing to content creators.
Yeah, no, it's a good question. And actually, so it ties into the last session of the day was a little bit of a Q&A it was the highest ranking guy that showed up. I think his name was Pandu, something. I may be butchering his name, but he was the head.
Yeah, I have that for sure agenda here. What was that? Here we go. Q&A with Pandu Nayak, the head scientist of search.
That's him. Yeah, honestly, that was the most disappointing session of the day. And I think most people kind of agreed with that after the fact. He felt very disconnected from everything else we had heard. So all of kind of the good points that I mentioned earlier, sitting down with an engineer who's in there grinding it out and they're taking notes, tell me more, you know what I mean? And you feel wow, I'm really being heard by somebody that's working on this. This felt like the opposite, back to very basic comments of how it works. And then Danny had kind of collected, stuff from us to try to consolidate most common questions, whatever. So the first thing he asks him, and he said it really, really well, about the site-wide classifier. So he kind of asked that on our behalf and lays it out what it means. And basically he just was that sort of stuff happens at the page level, kind of just denied it. So I raised my hand. I was I just wanted to clarify, what happened. I was I think you said it happens on a page level. I just want to, maybe I misunderstood. I was let me give you an example. And so I went back to the example that I told everybody this whole time. We can add our name to it. And we're on page 3 and we're one of 3 people in the world that
that's not page level. That's called domain level.
Right. So how did that go from being number 1 to all of a sudden we're number 1 for nothing, page 1 for nothing, whatever. Right. And so again, it was kind of just a very kind of wishy-washy answer. But then later on, AI came up. So there was a guy in the back. It was the same guy that was in the travel space that was just I told him later, I was dude, that was fire, man. He was on it. He maybe he was an attorney or something. I don't know. Because he's back there. I guess the Google Q3 earnings call was happening while we're at this event, same day.
It was.
And so he tuned into this or something during the break. So he's back there quoting stuff from the Q3 earnings call. And he's raises his hands I got to push back on something you said, because again, he was saying some of the stuff, we want to authentic human voices, search is a totally different thing. We want search to be a human experience, that kind of stuff. And he was I just listened to the Q3 earnings call. And he's your CEO said that AI is our future, had these exact quotes that was all just AI everything, right? Which seems to be what you hear at the high level of Google. And he was and you're telling me, that's not true, that search is going to be about these human voices or whatever. And he was basically why should we keep creating content? He's why would any of us keep creating content? He's when your leadership is saying this no matter what you're saying. And again, there was no real good answer to that. You know what I mean? But everybody, I think, in the room was kind of like, yeah, so yeah, definitely hit them like hard on that. But I would say, again, the answers coming back from Google were very unsatisfactory, right? Like they're like, oh yeah, we'll turn that off now. You know what I mean? Like, so it's maybe it's a bit of an awkward spot for them. I don't know, but yeah, people were letting them have it about that for sure.
Let's transition if we can. Let's talk about next steps. And those next steps, by the way, to your point, feel free. Maybe this is a two-part question. What have you been doing since the HCU has decimated things? And maybe a second part of that question, or maybe wrapped into the first part, is what will you be doing differently, or what insights did you pick up from last week and the summit that are going to also add to what you're doing differently going forward?
Yeah, it's a good question. So, I kind of answered that for myself. I jumped the gun a bit there, but I mean, that's where I'm at, right? So like, you go, once I saw the example I shared, right? You can do this, you can add our name to it, and we're on page 3. Something's broken. Like there's nothing I can do to fix that. So that's what I determined like 8 months ago. And so the thing I would say to people, like, I feel like there's some frustration, and rightfully so. Like, I think when people hear Danny Sullivan quoted as saying, keep doing what you're doing and we're going to catch up, which he said almost exactly that, at least at the Chicago thing. I think what he means by that, I think what some people take that as is like, if they're used to publishing 2-3 times a week or every day or whatever, like Danny Sullivan wants me to keep publishing 2-3 times a week so their AI can steal my content and give it to people. Of course you want them to do that and whatever. Maybe that's what he means. But when he explains it more, that's not really what he's saying. Like he's more saying like, don't go, if you're creating helpful content, like we know you guys in the room are, and for other people, like don't go dismantle your site. Don't go pay for some really expensive like SEO audit. Like don't do some like rash decision. Like I think that's kind of what he means by keep doing what you're doing. Like stay the course, like try to stay people first, and like we're gonna like let Google catch up, as hard as that is to hear. I think that's more the advice. So even somebody asked at one of the events was just like, hey, are we going to be penalized? Like we had to lay everybody off, like, and we're not really creating content right now. Like if it takes 6 months to figure this out or whatever, like, or is that going to limit our ability to recover? And he said, no. He's like, basically like you don't have to be publishing content on this schedule to be helpful, whatever. So, take it for a grain of salt, whatever. I'm just telling you kind of what he said. So anyway, that's the way that I take that stuff. So again, I just stopped publishing content completely for Google. Yeah. And that was my whole strategy before, was long tail keywords, the Spencer Hawes method of old, I guess, right? Like all that stuff. And it was working great for a long time. I quit my job 6 years ago because of it. You know what I mean? Yeah. And it's like, and then it wasn't working. So I'm like, why would I keep doing that? So I'm not doing that. So everything I create is to get traffic from somewhere else. Right now, I'm having the most success with Pinterest. Mm-hmm. That's been going pretty well. So that's kind of where I'm at. I have been doing, Facebook bonus programs, going okay, trying to get tuned up with the Amazon thing. So I'm just trying to be diverse in income sources, diverse in traffic sources, and then just keeping things as lean as I can, right? So I see it as survival mode. I still do think it'll come around to some degree because it does feel broken. I don't think it's going to be this broken forever. So I think when that day comes, hopefully I'll be in more of a well-rounded, kind of stronger position. A couple other things I heard just from other people at the event that were kind of inspiring. One guy in particular, he was reviewing like footwear or something, and he got into e-commerce throughout this and started selling like manufacturing socks and is crushing it. I mean, got really good at Facebook ads and all of these things. And like, now he's just like, at one point he was devastated that his review site was crushed. And now he's just like, I don't really need it anymore. Others that told stories about creating more video content and just like, forget Google, I'm just going to YouTube. Mm-hmm. That are having some success there, so people that are definitely like pivoting, right? Which desperation will make you do. One other one that I was going to look into, I have not heard of. Somebody mentioned the Yahoo, I think it's called the Yahoo Creator Program, is what it is, which they said maybe something similar to MSN, like where you can kind of apply and sort of get in and they feature stories and do like a rev share model. So just like another place to distribute your content. So I don't think that they were making huge amounts of money there, but I'm just kind of the belief, like, I don't know, every little bit helps, when you're trying to survive a little bit. So that's sort of where I'm at. But in a lot of ways, I've been I've been fortunate because I do have a portfolio of sites. At this point, all of them have been touched to some degree, but I was able to spread it out a little bit. I know a lot of people out there, they're just running one site. And if you get one site and it's down 90-95%, I mean, that's hard, man. So I certainly have sympathy, and I know it's tough times, but yeah, dude, I'm just trying to hang in there and hoping for better days, like doing what I can. So
to wrap up, everyone who's listening right now saw the title of this podcast, knew what we were going to be talking about. They all came into this with their own personal stories of what the HCU has or hasn't done to them. Certainly, if it didn't affect them, they came in with a lot of tangible stories from friends and colleagues and other people. And they came in with a certain set of expectations, or at least feelings about how this has gone for the last couple of years, right? About a year plus now. They've listened to this podcast now. I don't want to get overly poetic, but I mean, if there's something that you could say to people who are listening who've been affected just like you, almost maybe a summary of how you walked away in a sentence or two feeling differently. What changed for you walking away from this summit that you didn't have going in? I've heard you talk about hope. I don't know if you got more hope from this or if you had that hope going in and it was just reinforced. I've heard you talk about, you didn't really have a lot of answers and other things, but like maybe what has changed from a sentiment side or from a feeling side for you prior to going to this and afterwards? And again, I just think a lot of people are wondering, like, where do I go with some of the information that came out of what you shared and where we're going now?
Yeah. I mean, you've heard a lot of people say, like, Danny Sullivan's a really nice guy. And it's true. Like, yeah, he seems to be a genuine, like, really caring person about publishers. I feel for the guy. He's in a tough spot. You know what I mean? Like, man, hard, because, and he was emotional, at both events. He kind of started as a blogger, whatever. And so think of him what you will. I think he's genuine, but a lot of people have said, hey, nice guy doesn't pay my bills, and that's true. And I think he said it. And after going this, I do believe it, that at least some other people at Google really do care and really do want to get this right. I do believe that it's complicated. Like, a lot of people say, just roll it back, just turn it off, right? But it's like you have the September update that rolls into the March update. And like, I don't get how all that works, but I do believe, like, that sounds simple, but it's probably not that simple. So like the worst thing in the world is like, yeah, give us a few months. We're working on that because it's been a year. You know what I mean? So I think my advice to folks is, like, if you can, like, if you still want to do this, like, you have to get diverse in how you're getting traffic. I don't think it's ever coming back like it was. I do think it will come back better to some degree. I could be totally wrong. You know what I mean? So I think I wouldn't tell anybody who's starting a blog right now, like, hey, go what I would have told you 2-3 years ago about, keyword research and like long tail keywords, all that stuff. Like, I feel like everything I used to know is totally different or gone or broken. Right. So like, I wouldn't start there. Like, I would come into something new or something working on just like, okay, multiple ways I'm getting traffic. Ideally multiple ways I'm earning money, right? Like that sort of thing. Like, that's where my mind goes of what I would say to people. I would say, if you're just sitting around, like, doing the same thing, like, I'm going to keep publishing content the same way, and that's like, Google's going to come back around and that's what you're doing. I think that's a bad idea. Like, I'm saying I have hope, but I'm proceeding on a day-to-day like I don't have hope. Like, it's like all the skeptics are right. Google doesn't care about you at all. They're never going to fix this. They don't know how to fix this. You may be right. Like, that might be true. So that's not a business strategy to say, like, oh yeah, they're going to figure it out eventually, right? So I've been going on like, I need to survive, assuming it's only going to get worse and not better, right? So that's where I'm at, and that's what I would tell other people to do. And then if it does come back, it's going to be like gravy. It's going to be a bonus. And so that's what I would say is, like, don't just keep pumping out content thinking Google's going to come around. Like, it may never come around. If so, from this event, they were very clear. It's not like it's going to get fixed next week. We're talking months, not weeks, that kind of thing, right? So if that's what you're doing, I wouldn't do that.
Well, if you are wondering what to do, not to a shameless plug, but I mean, basically the last year of interviews we've had in the Niche Pursuits podcast has been all about stories about people who have pivoted, tried pivoting, tried this, tried that, Pinterest traffic, Flipboard traffic. I mean, the whole gamut of things. And, to your point, it's almost ironic, the full circle. Like, it's ironic that I asked you a question about, does Google really just want us to create a brand? And in many ways, it's like, well, maybe we should want to create a brand because, the more we can diversify our traffic sources, the more we can get talked about outside of Google, the more likelihood we probably have of getting resurfaced in Google someday if they ever do fix this and get it right. So
Yeah.
full circle, if you will. But hey, Jake, I can't thank you enough for coming on this. This is a bit of a dicey topic, let's be honest. I don't know if you felt like you're in the hot seat. I feel like it almost every week when I'm sitting here talking about this sort of stuff. Like it's triggering. It's like sensitive. It's hard. And
what's interesting? Sorry to cut you off, Jared.
Yeah.
When I put that thing on the AMA thing on the Mediavine, which that's the first time I posted on there in years, right? I just thought, oh, this will be interesting. And then somebody asked a question. I was trying my best just to either give my opinion on it, what I heard, or I think Danny would say this, that kind of stuff. And then the replies would be I was Danny. You know what I mean? Well, what about what you did here? And I'm like, I didn't do anything. I'm just trying to tell you what I just heard, Yeah. So this may be one of those, right? And like I said, I saw some of the stuff that came out on Twitter or whatever. People that, first of all, the publishers that were at the event were amazing. We had a great time. It was worth it just to meet the people that we met. That's always, you would probably agree, to go to any kind of publisher meetup type event, meeting other people in the business. I would say that's one thing I would say, if you're able to do that and you're kind of working on an island, it's definitely worth it. You always pick up a thing or two. Right. It's just good to have people you can kind of talk shop with. So if nothing else, that was great. Some people left depressed, super mad, and screw Google. Some people probably left with a little bit of hope, everything in between. And that's all right. I'm not saying my way is right. I'm just trying to give it to you how I heard it and kind of how I'm moving forward with it. So I always tend to be an optimist. So some people might say I'm crazy, but I got a little glimmer of hope still.
Well, I appreciate you coming on, and thank you so much for joining us. It's been a while since we've talked to you on the podcast.
Yeah.
Little known fact, if you don't know this, Jake was the previous host of the podcast. A lot of people don't know there was a gap of how many, maybe 6-8 episodes you hosted? 10? I don't want to shortchange you.
I only did a few by myself, but I did some with Spencer back in the day. So I'm sure they still get tons of views.
Well, I mean, I don't even know. It's a long-standing podcast. I think we're hitting 13 or 14 years now. So
you do a great job with it, man. Seriously. While I got you on the air, you're a very good interviewer. So I definitely, I don't listen to every single episode. I can't lie to you and say that, but the ones that pique my interest, I'll throw in the headphones and go on a walk, and you do an excellent job with it. So nicely done.
Well, I appreciate it. Right back at you. Thanks for coming on board and sharing with us. I think we all got to learn a lot from it. Certainly there's been a lot said about this. And to your point, it's triggering for a lot of people. It's hard. It has to do with people's livelihoods, has to do with people's passions. It has to do with what pays the bills, what pays the mortgage, what buys the car, what puts food on the table. We're not talking about 10% up, 10% down. We're talking about complete life changes. It's been really hard. Thanks for joining us. And again, I think that we learned a lot in what we didn't learn and in what we did learn, right? We learned a lot from a high level about all sides. And where can people follow along with you as we close out? If they want to maybe reach out, if they want to talk to you more, if they want to just kind of continue to follow along what you're doing.
I don't do a whole lot of just public, especially about what I would do for work kind of stuff. I guess you could look me up on Twitter. I don't post a whole lot outside of I'll post stuff maybe about my kids or something, not really professionally. But I don't care. If you want to DM me there, it's at Jake Cain 7, Cain is how you spell Cain. So certainly feel free to send me a DM there. I'd be happy to respond to questions.
So basically, Jake's anonymous, and you're never going to hear from him. So consider this hour your lucky hour.
Right. I stay pretty private.
Good for you, man. Hey, thanks for coming on board. Seriously, until we talk again, really appreciate it.
Hey, everyone. Thank you so much for listening to the Niche Pursuits podcast. I just wanted to remind you that if you are ready to start building smarter, faster, and easier internal links, you should check out Link Whisper. You can get $15 off Link Whisper when you use the coupon code PODCAST at checkout. Head over to linkwhisper.com and use the code PODCAST in order to save $15. Thanks again for listening.